Hey everyone, so here's the deal. I am 27-year-old male, have found myself cohabiting with my in-laws for the past 3 weeks. My wife, age 25, and I have been married for 3 years, and she's currently 8 months pregnant. She expressed a desire for her family to move in to provide support during her maternity leave, as she didn't want to be alone all day while I was at work. I understood her need for assistance and initially suggested just having her mother over. Despite my personal feelings toward her mom, I was willing to compromise for the sake of my wife's comfort. However, my wife insisted on having her entire family move in, so I eventually relented. So, 3 weeks ago, her parents and two younger siblings, a 22-year-old brother and an 18-year-old sister, all moved into our house. I'm grateful that my parents allowed us to stay in their home after we got married. They've since retired and run a B&B on the outskirts of the city. With the new living arrangements, my wife claimed the shared bedroom entirely, and my mother-in-law insisted on also occupying our bedroom due to her back issues. Meanwhile, my father-in-law primarily stays in the guest room, my sister-in-law sleeps on the pull-out couch in the living room, and my brother-in-law sleeps on a mattress on the living room floor. As a result, I've been relegated to my childhood bedroom, which I'm not too thrilled about. With my wife's due date approaching, I had hoped to be by her side when she goes into labor. However, it seems my mother-in-law will likely be the first one there, and I'll admit, I feel a twinge of resentment towards her. While I understand my wife's close bond with her family, I can't help but feel that having everyone move in was a bit excessive, especially considering the circumstances. Nonetheless, since she was adamant about it, I chose to support her decision. My wife, 8 months pregnant and quite emotional, was insistent on having her family around for support during her maternity leave. Despite my reservations, I acquiesced to her wishes, understanding that their presence brought her comfort in such a crucial time. However, the past 3 weeks have been incredibly challenging. Living with her family proved to be difficult. Her siblings, particularly, were quite lazy and needed constant reminders to clean up after themselves. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law seemed to find fault in everything, often criticizing our belongings and disparaging my parents' taste in furniture and decor. While my father-in-law mostly kept to himself in the guest room, my mother-in-law's behavior grated on my nerves. Her rudeness and constant nitpicking became unbearable, especially considering that my parents had generously provided us with a spacious, well-furnished house at no cost. Despite my growing frustration, I tolerated their presence for the sake of my wife's well-being. I tried my best to avoid unnecessary conflict and drama, although it required significant restraint on my part. However, after enduring weeks of discomfort, I reached my breaking point. 2 days ago, while I was at work and my wife was out with my mother-in-law for a checkup, I made the decision to confront them. I could no longer tolerate their behavior, and I demanded that they leave. It was a difficult decision, but one that I felt was necessary for my own sanity and well-being. My wife, in her 8th month of pregnancy, had requested her family's presence to assist her during her maternity leave, as I was still required to work. Initially hesitant about the idea of her entire family moving in, I suggested only her mother stay. However, my wife insisted on having her whole family over, and I relented to her wishes. Over the past 3 weeks, having her parents and two younger siblings move in had proven to be quite challenging. Her siblings were lazy and required constant reminders to clean up after themselves, while my mother-in-law incessantly criticized our belongings and decor. Her disdain for my parents' taste in furnishings, despite them generously providing us with a spacious home, grated on my nerves. Despite the difficulties, I tolerated the situation for the sake of my wife's comfort and happiness. However, as the days passed, tensions rose. I found myself increasingly biting my tongue to avoid confrontation. Eventually, I reached my breaking point and demanded they leave. One day, realizing I had forgotten my laptop at home, I returned to retrieve it. Upon entering, I noticed the absence of my in-laws and found my brother-in-law using my laptop. Confronting him, he confessed to copying my data for my wife, who had paid him for the task. Shocked by her actions, I confronted her upon her return home. In summary, while I had tolerated the inconvenience of having my in-laws stay with us, the the breach of privacy and deception regarding my personal data were unacceptable. It was a challenging situation, but I stood my ground for the sake of my principles and well-being. Within an hour of my return, my wife could discern from the expressions on both my face and her brother's that something was amiss. Sensing the palpable tension, she promptly ushered me into our room for a private tête-à-tête. Her mother, with a disapproving gaze, lingered in the background, a silent witness to the unfolding drama, undoubtedly hinting at her involvement in the situation. My suspicions were duly confirmed when my wife, with a mix of contrition and apprehension, admitted to orchestrating a clandestine scheme behind my back. She confessed to enlisting her brother's aid in surreptitiously copying data from my electronic devices, with the covert intention of scrutinizing it for any hints of potential infidelity on my part. The revelation of her actions struck me like a thunderbolt, igniting a storm of emotions within me. I was deeply wounded and profoundly offended by her lack of trust in me, especially considering my steadfast commitment to our marriage. Despite my unwavering fidelity and unwavering dedication, she had seen fit to cast doubt upon my integrity, prompting a surge of anger and indignation within me. Struggling to contain the tempest of emotions raging within me, I confronted her with a mixture of incredulity and righteous indignation. My voice, tinged with a potent blend of hurt and anger, reverberated through the room as I demanded an explanation for her actions. How could she have entertained such baseless suspicions about my fidelity, especially in light of our history together? My attempts to maintain a semblance of composure were rapidly eroding, overshadowed by a rising tide of raw emotion. In the wake of my outburst, my wife, her facade of defiance crumbling, succumbed to a flood of tears. Overwhelmed by a maelstrom of guilt and remorse, I found myself grappling with a profound sense of regret for causing her such anguish. With a heavy heart, I endeavored to extend a comforting embrace, seeking solace in the embrace of her trembling hands. As she tearfully poured out the truth behind her actions, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It transpired that her mother, acting as a malevolent puppeteer behind the scenes, had been surreptitiously instilling her with unfounded fears and suspicions for the past 3 weeks. Fueled by a toxic cocktail of insecurity and paranoia, she had subjected my wife to a relentless barrage of insidious insinuations preying upon her vulnerabilities and exploiting her deepest fears. In her relentless campaign to sow seeds of doubt and discord, she had succeeded in poisoning my wife's mind against me, sowing the seeds of mistrust that had ultimately led to this painful reckoning. This woman, whose toxic influence had insidiously infiltrated my wife's psyche, subjected her to a relentless onslaught of demeaning remarks and baseless accusations, preying upon her insecurities and exacerbating her already fragile emotional state. Night after night, my wife found herself tormented by a cacophony of self-doubt and apprehension, her already tumultuous emotions exacerbated by the hormonal fluctuations of pregnancy. In a moment of vulnerability and desperation, she succumbed to the temptation to validate her fears, resorting to a desperate and ill-conceived attempt to assuage her doubts. The revelation of my wife's actions struck me with a profound sense of anguish and remorse, compounding the distress caused by her unwarranted suspicions. My heart ached at the realization that she had been driven to such extremes by her own insecurities and the insidious machinations of her mother. It pained me to see her grappling with the weight of her own anxieties, haunted by the specter of her mother's disapproving gaze and the relentless pressure to conform to an impossible standard of beauty. As she tearfully laid bare the tumultuous landscape of her inner turmoil, I felt a surge of empathy and compassion tempered by a simmering undercurrent of righteous indignation. It was abundantly clear that her struggles with body image and self-esteem were deeply rooted in her fraught relationship with her mother, whose toxic influence had cast a long shadow over her formative years. The scars of her mother's relentless scrutiny and draconian dietary restrictions ran deep, leaving her vulnerable to the insidious whisperings of doubt and insecurity. Reflecting on the tangled web of dysfunction that had ensnared my wife's family for generations, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and frustration. It was abundantly clear that her mother's toxic behavior had inflicted immeasurable harm upon her psyche, instilling in her a deep-seated sense of inadequacy and self-doubt. Yet, despite the profound impact of her mother's toxic influence, my wife remained resolute in her determination to break free from the shackles of her past and forge a path toward healing and self-acceptance. In that moment of vulnerability and honesty, I was reminded of the boundless strength and resilience that lay within my wife, a testament to her unwavering courage and determination to confront her demons head on. And as we navigated the turbulent waters of her emotional journey together, I vowed to stand by her side, offering unwavering support and unconditional love every step of the way. For in the depths of her darkest hour, I found solace in the unwavering certainty of our love, a beacon of hope illuminating the path toward a brighter tomorrow. My wife had finally managed to establish a healthier relationship with food and exercise, maintaining a relatively stable weight since then. Despite her efforts to reconcile with her mother, it became apparent that little had changed. Her mother persisted in her toxic behavior, seemingly incapable of altering her ways. Even during my wife's pregnancy, her mother continued to harangue her about her weight, oblivious to the fact that she was carrying another life within her. Their recent visit to the doctor was marred by her mother's relentless insistence that my wife was overweight and overeating. As my wife tearfully confessed her misguided actions, pleading with me not to abandon her, I felt a surge of compassion mixed with frustration. Her distress was palpable, her sobs echoing the depths of her despair. In that moment, all I could do was offer her solace, assuring her that her weight was inconsequential to me, and that her well-being was my utmost concern. Gradually, her sobs subsided, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. Unable to bear witnessing her anguish any longer, I resolved to take action. Confronting my in-laws, I demanded that they vacate our home, refusing to subject my wife to any further torment. Predictably, it was my mother-in-law who put up the most resistance, asserting her supposed right to remain in her daughter's home. Yet, I stood my ground, reminding her that the house rightfully belonged to me, an inheritance from my own parents whom she harbored resentment towards. Eventually, my father-in-law intervened, persuading her to leave with him. Since then, I've devoted myself entirely to caring for my wife, providing her with the reassurance and support she desperately needs. The ordeal has left her emotionally drained, and I am determined to help her navigate through this turbulent time. It baffles me how a mother could subject her own child to such emotional turmoil, particularly during a vulnerable period like pregnancy. My mother-in-law's behavior is beyond belief. Despite my wife being pregnant and already dealing with so much, she continued to harass her about her body. Then, to top it all off, she had the nerve to text me yesterday, demanding to move back in to take care of my wife. I was furious when I received that message, and in the heat of the moment, I made it clear that she would be lucky to even be allowed near my wife or baby in the future. I blocked her immediately. However, this morning, my usually reserved father-in-law called me and insisted that I owed my mother-in-law an apology. He claimed she had been inconsolable since last night, unable to bear the thought of being separated from her daughter and future grandchild. According to him, she only wants what's best for us. Am I the antagonist for refusing to let my mother-in-law see my wife after she had been causing her so much distress during her pregnancy? Update. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who commented on the original post. My heart truly goes out to those who have faced similar experiences. I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been for you. I genuinely hope that one day you can overcome the trauma of being shamed and harassed for your body type. Since cutting off contact with her family, my wife has been doing much better. It has been almost a week since we last heard from any of them. My wife never even wanted her family to come live with us initially. It was her mother who insisted on it. Not only did she drive my wife crazy during their stay, but she also constantly nagged her about her weight throughout her pregnancy. I feel guilty for overlooking the impact her mother was having on her. I was so focused on providing a safe environment for my wife and the baby that I forgot to consider the negative influence of my mother-in-law. My wife confided in me that she had been feeling insecure about her body once again due to her mother's constant criticism. Living with her mother had caused my wife to behave irrationally and suspiciously, but she assured me she was over it and promised not to repeat such behavior. However, my main concern was her mental well-being. Given the circumstances with her brother and what she had coerced him into doing, I understood her actions stemmed from being overly emotional and paranoid, fueled by the nonsense her mother had filled her head with. I reassured her that she could eat whatever she wanted, as it was nobody else's concern but her own. I also shared with her the exchange I had with her mother a few days prior, and she agreed that I handled it appropriately. Neither of us wants her mother back in our lives, considering the torment she inflicted on my wife. Allowing her into our home was a mistake, one I won't repeat. Instead, we'll seek professional help if needed, as her family is no longer a viable option for support. While I would love to involve my parents, I don't want to disrupt their peaceful life. They've promised to visit when my wife goes into labor, but until then, I won't trouble them. Currently, I'm working from home and spending quality time with my wife, ensuring she eats enough and providing her with support. With her due date approaching in a couple of weeks, I hope for smooth sailing ahead. We're not equipped to handle any more challenges, especially at this late stage of the pregnancy. After nearly 10 days since we made the difficult decision to ask my mother-in-law to leave, she unexpectedly reappeared, disrupting the fragile peace we had managed to restore in our home. It began abruptly one morning, with the jarring sound of banging on our front door accompanied by the familiar voice of my mother-in-law, yelling at the top of her lungs. Instantly recognizing the source of the commotion, my wife wasted no time in urging me to contact the authorities, and within a remarkably short span, law enforcement officers arrived to escort her away from our property. However, her abrupt departure didn't mark the end of our ordeal. Despite the intervention of the authorities, my mother-in-law persisted in her attempts to reach out to us, resorting to desperate measures to convey her message. One such instance involved her enlisting the help of our neighbor, an uncomfortable situation for her to be in. She informed us that my mother-in-law had approached her, handing over a note intended for my wife. In the note, my mother-in-law brazenly implored my wife to leave me and return to her family so that she could assume the role of caretaker, warning of her disappointment otherwise. Thankfully, my wife is a strong, independent individual who doesn't require such supervision. Upon learning of the note, I immediately discarded it, sparing my wife the distress of its contents. It was a clear indication that the situation had escalated beyond control, prompting us to consider legal action. Together, we made the difficult decision to pursue a restraining order against her, recognizing that her continued presence posed a significant threat to our well-being. Reflecting on the tumultuous events that had unfolded, I couldn't envision a scenario where my mother-in-law's involvement would yield anything but further turmoil. Her actions had already inflicted considerable emotional distress upon my wife, spanning from her childhood to her present pregnancy. While I might entertain the possibility of reconciliation with other members of her family, my mother-in-law's repeated transgressions left no room for forgiveness. Allowing her back into our lives had been a grave error, one that I vowed not to repeat. As we embarked on the arduous process of seeking legal protection, my primary concern remained the well-being of my wife and our unborn child. With each passing day, our resolve strengthened, fueled by the determination to safeguard our future from the disruptive influence of my mother-in-law. My cherished wife and I have been blessed with the arrival of our precious baby girl, marking the inception of an exhilarating chapter in our journey together as parents. With unwavering determination, we've embarked on a solemn pledge to nurture and guide our daughter with the utmost love and care, fervently aspiring to redefine the concept of parenthood, steering clear of the tumultuous path paved by my in-laws. A pivotal step we undertook in safeguarding our newfound parenthood was the procurement of a restraining order against my mother-in-law, spanning a tenure of 2 years. Upon being served with the legal injunction, she descended into a state of frenzied despair, resorting to desperate measures in an attempt to breach the imposed barrier. Fervently, she sought to enlist the aid of acquaintances, including my own parents, friends, and select relatives of my wife, harboring a hope that one among them would intercede on her behalf. Fortunately, however, their discernment prevailed, and they refrained from meddling in our affairs, cognizant of the deleterious influence that her presence exerted. Subsequently, the unfolding of another significant event transpired with the onset of my wife's labor, a laborious journey that stretched across a formidable expanse of 18 arduous hours. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of emotions that permeated the delivery room, a profound sense of euphoria engulfed us as we cradled our newborn daughter, an embodiment of pure innocence and boundless potential. However, juxtaposed against this profound joy was a palpable undercurrent of melancholy, stemming from the conspicuous absence of familial support during this monumental occasion. Concerned for my wife's emotional well-being, I resolved to secure the services of a seasoned counselor, with the aim of mitigating the risk of postpartum depression, a gesture that she graciously accepted. As we acclimatize ourselves to the rigors of parenthood, each moment spent with our daughter assumes an ineffable significance, imbued with a profound sense of wonder and responsibility. I harbor an unwavering belief that she will inherit the noble virtues and indomitable spirit of her remarkable mother, thereby transcending the constraints of heredity to carve out her unique destiny. Furthermore, amidst the vicissitudes of life, an imminent visitation from my parents augurs a respite from the solitude that had enveloped us, fostering a sense of harmony and completeness within the confines of our familial abode. In conclusion, as we traverse the uncharted terrain of parenthood, fortified by our unwavering resolve and boundless love, I am filled with an ineffable sense of optimism for the journey that lies ahead. Rest assured, dear readers, that I shall endeavor to regale you with further anecdotes from our unfolding narrative as we navigate the trials and triumphs of nurturing our beloved daughter.